I'm learning that 1 out of 4 CFOs who were born in the United States or raised in the United States worked at McDonald's in their life. It's, because I do ask, what was your first job? It's remarkable how often I get McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's.
So what was your first job?
My first job, I worked at a dishwasher if you don't count paper routes. My first job, I worked at a dishwasher at a seafood restaurant on Lake Winnisquam, New Hampshire. So it was called the Rusty Anchor. So
you did have a paper route. I had one as well. Our younger audience is probably like, papers, what's that?
Yeah, I got up an hour before my sisters to work on the paper route. I made like $6 a week. Like, why did my parents make me do that?
My parents did it with pretty much all of my siblings. I think all 7 of us at one point had responsibility for the paper route. We probably did it for like 30. My dad probably did it for 30 straight years. We're driving people around a lot of times, depending on who it was. My sister always got drove around. I usually was on my bike.
Yeah, I was a bike too. Yeah, my sisters, they had babysitting jobs. Back then, girls babysat, boys had paper routes. So.
Yeah, I get it. My sister did the paper route, and I don't think she ever had to ride the bike on it. I'm like, hey, wait a second. But it was also early in the morning, so I get it.
Yes. So.
All right. So board presentations, in your mind, what's the key to making sure you put together a board deck, a good board deck?
Yeah, I'd say the main thing, there's 2 things. First of all, understand your audience, right? If your board member is a group of scientists versus people who maybe are from a VC firm or who are CFOs from publicly traded companies or something like that, they're just going to have different expectations from what a CFO presents. It's got to be the same facts, of course, but it's how you present it. So understand the composition, the expertise, the level of financial literacy, and slightly different from that, their own perception of their level of financial literacy. I have found out that certain people think that they're financial experts, but they're not. And those are tricky to present in front of because they ask questions that they think are thoughtful and they're not. So really, it's the main thing. Understand the audience and then define clear objectives. Before you even start it, just say, okay, what is it that I want people to come away with, right? Usually the CFO, it's not cheerleading. You leave that to the CEO and maybe the sales and marketing people if they're also presenting on it. But it doesn't have to be a dull, uninteresting presentation either, right? If you're excited by the company's prospects, it's okay if that comes out during the presentation. On the other hand, if you have some concerns, this isn't the time to be a wallflower and keep those concerns to yourself. So it's a great opportunity. So define objectives, what it is that you want people to learn from your presentation. And always keep in mind the presentation is about the audience. It isn't about you. And finally, send it in advance. I learned this the hard way. Just as a good practice, you should be communicating with your board of directors regularly. I'm not saying daily, but there shouldn't be surprises at a board meeting. So, if your company missed its numbers by 5%, they shouldn't be learning that at a board meeting. They should have learned it at the board meeting the month before in a conversation or something. I did do that once. And it's like, why am I hearing about this now? I might have been able to help you. I might have been able to play a blah, blah, blah. So, no new information. It's a platform to discuss information that everybody has had an opportunity to review before the meeting. So
how often should you be communicating with the board? Are you giving them like a monthly package? Like, how do you think about that? I know you have your occasional board meetings, often quarterly for companies, but you mentioned, no surprises. So is it just sending them the financials monthly, or how do you think about making sure they're aware before going in the board meeting? Is it just getting them the deck ahead of time, or how do you think about that?
I encourage CFOs to, at a minimum, meet with the audit committee members, each one of them, preferably one-on-one. But again, if there's 5 of them, that might be a bit time consuming, but occasionally meet with them one-on-one just to go over things without the CEO on the call, by the way. You're not doing it behind her or his back, but just, their presence might inhibit candor. It might prevent them from asking questions that they want to ask of you. So you should proactively communicating with your board members between board meetings. Now, and the other thing is, if you have 12 board members, you should probably meet with each of them, again, one-on-one over Zoom or whatever, 2 or 3 times a year. There are companies that have 30 or 40 board members. And, if you were just meeting with them 2 or 3 times a year each, you wouldn't be doing any other work, right? So you've got to balance it a little bit. But there's such, it's such an important relationship. And, they do represent the owners of the company, right? And they're a very underrated resource for CFOs too. The VP of sales should call them, because if you're trying to reach a customer, board member might know a board member at that company. You want advice, you need a connection, whatever. The entire C-suite should feel good about reaching out to its board of directors who, invest in the company to make you more successful.
I really like the point where you emphasize look at them as a resource, because I've heard that where, the board member knows so-and-so, and we got this customer because they introduced us, right? If your board members are cheerleaders and helping you, there's customers they can introduce you to, there's things they've been through, or they can just be a sounding board. There's a reason they're on a board, and it's not because they haven't done anything in their career, right? They're going to have a lot of experience.
Yeah, occasionally get one who's on the board because they have a rich parent, but
well, sure, you always have one. Sometimes you have a CFO that has a rich parent.
Yeah, or in my case, just because I was so good looking that I didn't have to put in the work to get the role. So
yeah, I wasn't going to say that. I mean, your looks speak for themselves, but yeah.
And I can say something like that because this is a podcast where most people won't actually know what I look like. So trust me, I'm handsome, everybody. So it's really such an important relationship. And the side bonus there, Paul, is most CFOs, and there's a lot of data that's contradictory, but it appears that CFOs tend to change jobs every 2.5 to 5 years, depending upon whom you ask. So, it's really good if that's the case, if you have a board member with whom you have a really good relationship with, not only for the reference, but for your next job. I don't know, and you know different people than me. I don't know anybody who's only on one board. Every board member I know is on 3 or 4 boards, right? So, you just go to them and say, hey, Paul, I've loved being part of this company for 3 or 4 years. I think it's good for my personal growth. By the way, I think you might benefit from a fresh perspective here. Looking for my next CFO job. Who do you know? So not only those companies, but each one of those companies has 6 board members. It's like, hey, Mary's with a hot startup. You might be perfect for that. Let me introduce you to her. If you don't have that relationship, they're not going to go out of their way to help you, no matter how good you are at your job.
Now, the real question is that a hot AI startup?
Yeah. There's 1 or 2 of those out there right now, right? So,
yeah, one or two. That's probably about it. I think that you make a lot of great points, because at the end of the day, job and work it's a relationship business, whether you're finance or sales or wherever you are. It's so important to develop relationships, as they'll help you in your career, and not just because they'll help you. We should develop good relationships to be good people, but there's so many other benefits in that, networking and really learning to know your board and develop that strong relationship.
Yeah, I mean, being nice is its own reward, but yes, it also does have some benefit to it. So
yeah, exactly. The next question I wanted to ask you is, how do you balance, you mentioned you don't want to be a cheerleader. So how do you balance optimism versus reality? You don't want to come in and be Debbie Downer either. We've seen kind of both extremes of that. So how do you balance that with the board? Because you want to make sure you're transparent. Any advice around that?
Hopefully optimism and realism are the same thing in most cases, right? But there's a burden on the CFO. Boards expect them to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help them God, as the saying goes. So you don't spin things. You don't exaggerate. You don't make errors of omission. The board deserves and needs the full truth. It doesn't mean you have to present it in a negative way, right? But you can't be a cheerleader. It's a juggling act all the time. What can get a little scary for CFOs is sometimes, a lot of them have shared with me, they work for CEOs who are overly optimistic, and CEOs by their nature are optimistic. Founders of companies, they have to be believing what they wouldn't have started the company if they weren't. And then professional CFOs, they're very confident people. They think they can overcome any challenge thrown at them. It lends itself to a natural optimism. Where it gets tough for CFOs is he's too optimistic. And I'm not even saying that they're lying. It's just, if everybody thinks that the company is going to grow 14% year over year, and the CEO's in front of the board of directors saying, I think we're going to grow at least 25 with a chance of 50%. What do you do there if you're the CFO and you're in the room and he says that or she says that, right? That's a really uncomfortable situation. Most of them would say you can't lie, but you don't have to go out of your way to say, "Hey, Frank's wrong. That's not the way it's going to go down." If you're called on, say a silent prayer if you're into that sort of thing, that you won't be called on. But if you're called on, you have to tell the truth. But as long as it's a difference of opinion, most people don't think that you have to like go out of your way to give your opinion. The issue is when it becomes to the point of it's just an irresponsible opinion.
Sure. If you know, hey, that's just not possible, right?
Yeah.
It's one thing to be optimistic. And so it's like, hey, that's a great number, that we do have some reservations about achieving that or whatever it might be. So people realize if you're asked, hey, there's real concerns. And if it's completely wrong, sometimes you have to manage that. It's never a fun one when it's like, no, that's just not right.
Yeah, exactly. I worked at a company, and the guy, he was very honest, but like I thought his revenue projections were crazy. On the other hand, like his last company, he made them. It was a Inc. 50 company. It was the fastest growing company in Massachusetts. He took them public, and they had a $6 billion market cap at a point. Not a lot of Massachusetts companies of that age had a. So who am I to say that he's overly optimistic, right? I might have felt it, and if a board member called and said, "What do you think of this?" I would have been truthful, but sometimes you got to have faith in the CEO's vision. And by the way, if you don't, maybe it's time to polish up the old resume too. And it doesn't require lying. If you just, hey, she's not the one, he's not the one, whatever. You don't belong there. You need somebody that you can believe in, that you can stand behind, that you think will get you through the rough times, and that you want to work for and build something great with.
I agree with you. But what if they're a psychopath?
Yeah, that happens once in a while. Good luck with that, because as you know, I did write a book on that. The quick advice is, if you're convinced you're working for a psychopath, maybe start to make the graceful exit. So it's not a lot of good things come from working for psychopaths. However, one thing I've learned since I wrote the book is a lot of people associate psychopaths with evil. And often that, in fact, is the case. However, they're not inherently evil. Their biggest thing is they just can't, they have absolutely no sense of empathy. Everything exists for their benefit. So, they're not crushing people because they get any pleasure from it necessarily. They're just, this person's in my way, so I'm going to remove them. And if it ruins their lives, they'll do it. But yeah, I've known several people since I wrote the book, who worked for psychopaths. None of them look back on the experience fondly and say, but it was difficult, but it was a growth time for me. I'm glad I did it. I haven't had a conversation like that yet. And yet there are some very successful CEOs who a lot of people think are psychopaths. So, one was Steve Jobs. A lot of people have thought he was a psychopath. Probably the best CEO of our lifetime, don't you think?
He has to be right up there. I mean, if he's not number one, he's top 2 or 3 for sure.
Yeah, there's history. There's Henry Ford, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates. I think Elon Musk is probably in that category now. A handful of others, but not too many. So
I agree with you. And so yeah, I think when we talked last time, I remember you mentioning Steve Jobs as an example, and it's a tricky in that, yeah, could you learn a lot from Steve Jobs? Sure. But if it's a unhealthy work environment, is that where you want to be? Everybody has to decide.
Yeah, you can make yourself absolutely miserable. And then again, Steve Jobs, despite his oddities, and maybe he wasn't the nicest guy, but there's no indication that he was unethical in business. A lot of them are, especially as, you don't want it at all, but especially as a CFO, you don't want to work for a company that was perceived as unethical, right? There weren't psychopaths involved, but how would you want to present a resume that you worked for a company like Enron, right?
Yeah, if your list of companies is WorldCom, Enron, Arthur Andersen, you got a problem.
Yeah. The one thing that you leave a job with is your reputation. Hopefully you make some money, get some learning experiences, but absolutely the one thing that's going to follow you to the next one is your reputation. And it better be a good one. So